Again, the U.S. has entered the war officially. The Congress has declared war on Japan as well as the Axis powers of Germany and Italy. So, what does that mean for the home front? Again, to, conducting a war is such a monumental effort. You need everybody to pitch in. You need to nationalize the war effort. All right, the home front becomes just as crucial as the front lines. So, what does that mean for the U.S. at the time? Well, again, you have a country that's still in the midst of the Great Depression, and now suddenly you have to fully shift gears to have everybody pitch in for the war effort itself. Specifically, you need to mobilize the economy. So, what does the government do? Well, they sign cost plus contracts. Basically, they agree to pay a company whatever it costs to make a product plus the guaranteed percentage of the cost as a profit. Right? It's a little confusing, but basically, the more a company produced and the faster it did of all the work, the more money it would make. So, you're talking about contracting out to companies like Boeing to make airplanes, all the various defense contractors, anybody and everybody who could produce raw materials. These are really big deals. The U.S. needs not only raw materials, but you also need finished products to help the war effort. You also have the War Production Board, the WPB. Basically, they had the authority to set priorities and production goals and to control the distribution of raw materials and supplies. Everything's funneled towards the war effort. Um, that being said, not everything's going to run completely smoothly, so you have a clash with the military who continue to sign contracts without consulting. Again, the military's basically full steam ahead. We need all of the materials and weaponry possible to actually fuel the war effort. So the solution is basically you create an entire office within the government. You create an entire bureaucratic agency called the War Office of War Mobilization to settle those arguments between different agencies and make sure everything's kind of running as smooth as possible. You also have wage and price control. The Office of Economic Stabilization basically regulated wages and the price of farm products. You need everything to be more or less controlled. Again, this is all kind of a uniform war effort. Right? You can't be having various industries jacking up prices based off of supply and demand for the war. You also have the Office of Price Administration, again, regulating all the prices. Everything needs to be on board. Right? This is a unified effort, so we do not need price gauging or anything like that. Both of them, in combination with one another, are actually working to control inflation and then also prevent striking. Last thing you need is nobody to actually produce the goods that you need, so you don't need any labor disputes. Also on top of that, you had kind of a newfound thing, which was rationing. So you're talking about the limiting the availability of many products to make sure enough are being available for military use. So this is where you're getting the public involved. You have meat and sugar rationed for the army, gas is rationed. You had restrictions on driving, speed limit set at 35 miles an hour. You had various coupons of red and blue, controlled processed foods, meats, fats, and oils. Give over enough coupons to cover your purchases. So again, yes, you will still be able to get the groceries you need, but again, we need to reserve a lot of supplies for the military itself. So everybody's going to kind of pitch in, everybody's going to give up something for the war effort. You also have victory gardens, again, trying to get more public involvement in planting and harvesting food for the military. Everything kind of in the patriotic, nationalistic sense. That's any area of land, maybe a garden, very much encouraged by the government for people to go out and create these community gardens to help siphon off food for the military. You also have scrap drives, so any spare rubber, tin, aluminum, steel, pots, tires, tin cans, car bumpers, broken radiators, bicycles, bacon grease, meat drippings, basically anything that could be used for the military, people chipped in. It was all kind of a national effort. But as we know, conducting wars are very expensive things. They're not something as cheap as or easy as just going across the ocean and fighting an enemy. The government actually spent more than $300 billion on the war itself. So what do you got to do to achieve your goals in the war? Well, you have to raise taxes in order to cover costs. Again, funding war is not cheap. So by raising taxes, you're covered about 45% of the costs. Well, what else do you need to do? You need to issue war bonds. Basically, buying a bond is loaning money to the government. The government will inevitably pay you back with some interest, but you're saying, I will give you money in the meantime. Most common are E-bonds. You would say buy for $18.75 and get $25 after 10 years. Doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're buying in mass, it's a lot of money. So Americans buy about $50 billion worth. Again, these are treasury bonds which are guaranteed by the government. So it's a very safe bet, but nevertheless, it's a lot of money being raised. And on the other hand, you have banks, insurance companies, and other institutions buying about $100 billion worth. So this is where you're kind of getting everybody together, both privately and publicly, to go ahead and pitch in for the effort. So continuing on, again, in the name of trying to get everybody on board, you have the Double V campaign, which is undertaken by African Americans in the United States. It was a media campaign and kind of a grassroots continuation of civil rights, which is trying to get the African American community to support the war. Right? Again, the whole slogan was democracy at home as well as democracy abroad, saying that if we help out in the war effort, then we'll be able to further along our civil rights agenda and hopefully achieve more equitable democracy at home for African Americans as well. So this is kind of the early origins of a modern civil rights movement, which would gain even more traction in the 50s and 60s and so on. So this is where you're getting African American community to join the military en masse, again, do whatever you possibly can. So you have institutes like the Tuskegee Airmen, right? You have the very famous Red Tails, again, African American pilots who gained a lot of wartime notoriety for their excellent service record, and just overall trying to bring people together to fight the war on all fronts. You also have expanded roles for women in the war. Again, the vast majority of men were drafted off into the military to go fight overseas. So women, for the most part, are filling their roles in producing those goods, those weapons, that machinery needed for war. So you get, this is where the origins of Rosie the Riveter going in and fulfilling those manufacturing jobs. That being said, though, women are not just working on the home front. You also had excellent service records of women in the military themselves. You're talking about all-female flying units who have excellent service records and don't get enough notoriety that they deserve. And then there's kind of the ugly side of this, which is Japanese internment, which is something that really hits in our backyard specifically. So Executive Order 9066 was signed by FDR. It was the U.S. government removing people of Japanese ancestry from California and parts of Oregon, Washington, and Arizona. These were all deemed to be military essential zones, and there was a large fear after Pearl Harbor of Japanese spies from stealing military secrets, and it posed a big threat to the United States domestically. So what happened was, in that order, upwards of 110,000 Japanese Americans were rounded up by the army and sent to quote-unquote relocation centers. About 2/3 of those were Japanese people born in the U.S. of parents who have immigrated from Japan, and actually by the time that the order was carried out, many Japanese Americans had already joined the military at the time of the order, right? So it was very much a xenophobic, racist government policy where people in the American public, for the most part, were afraid of the so-called threat the Japanese Americans posed after the events of Pearl Harbor. There's a really good video at the bottom of this I really recommend watching. Kind of goes into a little bit more detail about the human stories of what the Japanese Americans are experiencing when they're removed from their homes and their businesses and sent off into these relocation centers, which actually were internment camps. For those of you who don't know, one of those relocation centers that would further shuttle these Japanese Americans away from Washington State was actually at the Puyallup State Fairgrounds. So, again, this is right in our backyard. Some really ugly history. Again, here's a map. So you can see the exclusion area, pretty much the entire West Coast. And then you have camps being placed off pretty much in the Midwest, even as far away as in Arkansas. So the big famous case, for those of you especially who take AP Gov, you'll deal with this a little bit more. But Korematsu v. U.S. in 1944, Henry Korematsu argued that his rights had been violated. He was an American citizen of Japanese ancestry. Um, the Supreme Court ruled against him, saying the relocation was based on military urgency and not on race. It actually gets overturned a year later when it said that loyal American citizens could not be held against their will. Again, this is a clear-cut example. These were all people who were American citizens who, based on their ancestry, were taken away from their homes and businesses due to fears because of their ancestry. And there's a couple pictures. So again, really recommend you check out that video, as well as the other videos in here too, with the women during the war, as well as the Double V campaign. Some really great stuff there about some more diverse voices about, yes, the war effort was mostly a unified, concerted movement amongst Americans to defeat tyranny abroad. But again, just because everybody, for the most part, is involved in the war effort doesn't mean there's some bad stuff going on at home too. But nevertheless, so hopefully you guys enjoy this. If you have any questions, please let me know. Again, it's not perfect. We're kind of working with what we got, but please do go ahead and watch the crash course. John Green does a good job of breaking that down as well. And next week we will talk a little more about the conclusion of the war and what's it look like after the war ends, both at home and abroad. So thanks again, guys. Hope you're staying safe. And like I said earlier, please email me if you have any questions.